Let us now talk matters concerning the nation. Earlier this week, the World Bank unveiled its report on the state of the country's education. The World Bank acknowledged that there were challenges and also achievements in the sector. It also presented some solutions for the ills facing the sector. Today, we focus on the two of the solutions proposed by the World Bank, and one, to start with, it said that the primary leaving examinations should be scrapped off in order to ensure that more students advance to secondary education. Now, secondly, it said that all schools should be privatized, especially those that are failing the public schools, so that they are given to the private managers to improve them. We want to discuss how these positions can actually improve the problems that we are facing, and tonight we have Dr. Muhammad Mpezamihigo, who also comes with a wide experience as an educationist spanning more than 20 years. Welcome to our studios tonight.
Thank you so much for hosting me.
You've had yes, good evening. You've had the two solutions that have been put forward by the World Bank. Do you think they are addressing the real challenges that our education sector in the country is facing?
First of all, I think we should treat the report positively, because when you have an analysis of your own higher education or education system in the country, and an external service provider comes on board and looks at probably what we are not looking at, or looking at it in more detail. So personally, I think it's a good thing and a good starting point. However, the overall objective of this study, I imagine, is to enhance or to increase enrollment from the lower level education to the higher education sector. So the more pupils you have from the primary section going to secondary school section would also lead to more enrolling into higher education, that is university and post-secondary. Now, the theory that scrapping of PLE, primary leaving examination, that would lead to an increase, probably yes, but the danger would be, of course, that what type of students would you be receiving at the university level or post-secondary. So in essence, we need to understand it's probably more than the PLE, absolutely. Now, the suggestion that private providers take on the failed maybe public schools is an indication that government recognizes that probably the standards and quality with the increase of private providers in our country, or at every level from nursery up to university, that means that as a nation, we recognize the contribution of all the private providers, and there are some good case studies that would prove that indeed the private providers would probably try to reduce this problem. However, most of the private providers are driven by profit. Yes. And that would also have an issue. Now, the question would be, why is it that the private primary schools and private secondary schools are now becoming so competitive, and they have started pushing in a lot of students to the higher education? Before you go any further, let me ask you. Yes.
According to you, do you think, if you were to compare government schools and private schools, which schools do you think produce better results?
I mean, there isn't a straightforward answer to that, definitely, because traditionally in the years, in the past decades, we had traditional schools that sent students to the university regardless of where you went. And so it was really a point of harmonization, a point of level ground. Now, with the increase in population and also interest in providing education by private providers, you find that some of the old traditional schools, public schools, have actually been out-competed, and in some schools things have gone terribly wrong. However, if we look at what the World Bank is trying to propose, I think the whole process has a challenge. We are looking at knowledge transfer from the primary school level into secondary, and then into university. It has to be an entire cycle. If we look at the education system in Uganda, it's actually segmented. You will find that those of us who are in the university sector mind less about what is happening at the primary school level. And those in the secondary school are only waiting for the PLE results to come out, and they're able to entice students to join them. Little do they care about what goes on there. They're only interested in the performers, and the bulk of our population remains at, at those levels. Personally, I have found it very interesting and also challenging at the same time. I launched a school in 2016, a primary school, national primary school, and somebody asked me, "You are a vice chancellor, why would you think even of going to start a primary school?" Now, in the last 3 years, I notice it's a much more complex situation. People who apply to come and teach, they are qualified, but they won't be able to do the exam for the class they would like to teach.
So what you're trying to say, they will sit for the exam, but
yes,
they won't pass it.
The interview given to a primary 4 teacher is for a primary 4 class, and they won't pass it. So you'll find quite a number of them, and some of them have been teaching for ages. Others teach, but they are teaching the wrong concepts. However, universities and post-secondary institutions are responsible for training those teachers.
But before we even go further, do you think PLE exams are necessary? Do you think we should have them?
Of course, there should be a system to assess. Yeah, the reason the primary leaving exams are actually on is because you've delivered content, you are targeting the 3 domains of education: knowledge, skills, and attitudes. Well, in the PLE, we actually test mainly knowledge. So now the issue would be, rather than scrap them, would we have a different version of a PLE, for example, so that you are able to capture the competences, the skills, and the attitudes, because our exams don't test the attitudes. And that's the difference the parents look for when they are actually selecting schools. They say, the curriculum is the same. We teach a national curriculum. However, you'll find parents ferrying their kids miles and miles and skipping like 20 good schools, because in that first school there is a value that is not being brought out by the curriculum. So I would suggest that there should be comprehensive study of the entire system, because it's really an ecosystem. It's all one. You can't look at the primary section and say scrap of PLE. Now later, shall we also scrap of the O-level exams? What happens? And therefore, what are the universities doing? Because if we stay back and wait for reform to take place, then you will find the whole country will have an issue. And so it will only be the very few who are privileged who will have access to good quality education. So the point I'm trying to suggest here is, as a country, can we initiate a dialogue and bring on board all the stakeholders? We should mind about pre-primary education, and then the primary education, and then secondary, and then the university. University should come on board and appreciate what is taking place, because we wait and we are fading from the primary level. Yeah.
Now, there have been recent sort of adjustments or promises by the government that it's going to revamp or sort of increase salaries or do this and the other. Do you think those strategies still stand to help the education system?
Definitely. I tell you something. One of the key resources in improving quality of education is the human capital. Now, teachers who were trained many years ago are faced with modern day challenges. We live in an information age. You find a primary 2 kid who is more knowledgeable, who has more information about what you are going to teach. And if you were taught 10 years ago and you are not up to speed with the technology, that's a big issue. Now, the second thing, how does government and the World Bank and all these donors leverage the availability of technology? Can we apply technology to resolve some of these issues? Because some of the reasons given in the report is that the workloads, the UPE has been successful. It has brought out a lot of kids who have access to, basic literacy. The USE has also brought the same. However, we are not leveraging on the available technology to make learning easier, to improve on the methodologies. But finally, we need to think about retooling the teachers.
Okay.
The teachers do the job, they do the task. And also the parents. Parents have so many demands, and some of them participate less.
Okay.
And so it's an entire mix for which we need a dedicated team to understudy and also drive, some interventions that are going to see a holistic approach to the education system in this country. I know the National Curriculum Development Center has worked on the O-level, the ordinary level curriculum. Now there are suggestions for the primary level.
Yes.
Now what about the university? So an agency like the National Council for Higher Education, what is its role? Because you can't regulate universities when the feeder levels are doing their own business, you're also doing your own business. So we all have to come together and dialogue and have some meeting points.
Okay, and maybe finally, just in brief, do you think the solutions being provided by the World Bank are as a result of donor fatigue? Like they're just tired of giving us money, we say we come up with these schools, but now we have to maintain them and keep them in proper shape. Do you think it is because of donor fatigue?
Actually, I think donor fatigue is, of course, available because the global economic situation is tough. Many countries are struggling. But my proposal would be that, for example, our National Planning Authority should be able to sit and, engage technical teams and define the kind of workforce we need as a country. And once we know what we need, then we determine the deliverables at that level. And therefore impact, provide policy that would guide every level of education, because we shouldn't just produce massively. We should know now we are going into oil, we are actually widening within the East African region, what type of human capital do we need as a country, and therefore that should inform the design of interventions at all levels and in a holistic manner.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for coming to our studios tonight.
You're welcome, madam.
And of course for discussing with us what you think about the proposals or the solutions that the World Bank brought forward. That was it in Talk of the Nation. Thank you for joining us.